strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship.
On a mission to help agencies grow.
All right, rock on. We're here. Hi, Varun. How are you?
Great. Just came out from my workout and I have all the endorphins going on. So I have like active mind. I'm ready to go in.
That's good. That's good because I'm excited to chat with this guest. We have a lot of interesting topics to cover. So I feel like you're always at the workout right before we record these episodes. So it's impressive. But all right, so let's get into it then. Today's guest is a marketing thought leader. He's a speaker. He spent 10 plus years developing tailored solutions for Fortune 500 companies in wireless, biotech, electronics, food and beverage industries. His range of experience is so diverse that Merriam-Webster is considering adding the phrase Jeremy of all trades into the dictionary. He's the business principal at Bop Design, Jeremy Durant. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you both today.
We're excited to talk to you. So, and I like for those of you watching the YouTube version of this, you have a nice little branded thing in the corner. We should probably do that at some point. Of your screen there, so I enjoy that. All right, so we're going to start off the conversation talking about what myth you would like to smash, what bogus strategy you'd like to set the record straight on, what misconception you'd like to clear up. What do you got?
So, when my wife and I were looking to start a business, we had complementary skills. So, my whole background was in business development and sales. My wife's background was more in design and marketing. And the business we were going to start was going to be a marketing agency like, Bop Design has become. And we had a lot of naysayers talk to us like, hey, that's a really saturated market. It's very competitive. And are you sure you want to get into that type of business versus something else? And I always ask, what else would I do? Like my skill set, I guess for me, I could actually do something else in terms of sales and business development, but my wife's background was more in design and marketing. So you really have to work back from your skill set and not worry all the time about this myth of, hey, you do not want to enter a saturated market. Always work back from what your skill set is. And, if it's a saturated market, fine if you're good. Typically, if it's a saturated market, there's going to be plenty of demand for what you do. That's why it's saturated. And if you can, slowly but surely refine your process, gain a reputation, work with what you know and work with what you love. Don't worry all the time about the overall competitiveness or saturation of a particular market. So that's a myth I like to dispel, that I feel that certain people, when they're starting a business, tend to overthink. And I look at it and go, hey, what are you good at and what do you love to do? And then from there, design the business that way. And obviously you got to make sure there is demand in a market for what you do, but don't worry too much. Typically, if it's saturated, that means that there is a lot of demand in market for what you do. But, essentially I want to dispel that myth of overthinking about the saturation of a particular market with competition.
And to remind our listeners, you started the company in 2008-9. Is that correct?
So we arose out of the Great Recession of 2008. So what happened was I'm going to step back even further. So my wife and I got married in August 2007, went on our honeymoon. She was the marketing director at a mortgage company. The day we came back from our honeymoon, the honeymoon was literally and figuratively over because she got laid off that next day when she got back. So that was, she being in the mortgage industry was a leading indicator to what was going to be happening, about a year later with the, Great Recession of 2008. She got another job within a week, landed on her feet. But then essentially with me, I was the director of business development at a video production agency that worked with, a lot of, we did a lot of higher end production, and it was with, food and beverage, consumer electronics. But, there was just at that time, late 2008, there just was not a lot of demand for high end, video production work. So, it was it was very humbling to me as the director of business development that they had to lay off the entire company.
Oof.
Essentially everyone got laid off. And I came home and, I went right into battle mode of, okay, got to get my resume together, got to get, start applying for jobs. And my wife's like, hey, hold up. Like, we keep talking about starting our own business, starting our own agency. We have complementary skills. We're never going to do it when it's, unless our back's up against the wall. When it, if it's inconvenient because we have, steady paychecks, it's going to be very hard to come home every night having a steady job and work on this. You're only going to do it when your back's up against the wall, and that's the only choice you have. So that night we made the decision, hey, we're going to go forward with it. I didn't apply for any jobs. I kind of patchwork together some consulting gigs and sales and marketing and teaching during that time. But yeah, we started really hit the ground running late 2008, early 2009. And, so, basically about a year and a half later, she was, we were actually at one point, I was scheduling meetings and calls on her lunch breaks. She had a full-time job, and she would, we would do, sales meetings, client meetings and calls on lunch breaks. And then finally about a year and 4 months later, she came on full-time, and she was actually the first full-time Bop Design employee because I was still working some other consulting gigs. But yeah, so, out of a very negative situation came a very positive situation.
So interesting how you chose and took the decision about starting your own company. I wonder, when you were that small, when you're starting out, right, and you and your wife had some experience in the industry, but when you thought about starting a company, what was going in your mind? Like, how would you get your first customer, right? um, you mentioned earlier that the demand is huge, competition is huge, but still there must be something
Yes.
that you were thinking, like, it's at the end of the day, it is business. You need to make more money, and pay your costs. But at that time, your time is your cost. You probably did not have any employees, it's just you. So there is the cost is comparatively less, but at the same time you need to think about sales. So what was the strategy behind, starting a business from sales perspective?
Yeah. So this is the exact opposite of what we do now. Like, we rely solely on inbound marketing for all of our leads. At the beginning, we actually had more time than money. So beauty of having more time is you're going to do more outbound, networking, professional networking. I was doing cold calling, cold emails, things like that, where, targeting specific marketing directors, primarily of small businesses, in particular in the B2B space. We weren't completely dead set on B2B at that point. It was more small businesses. They just happened to be more professional services firms. So at that time, now it's a good problem to have. I actually have more money than time. But at that time, I had very little money and nothing but time to go out and drum up business. So, I would go to, the Chamber of Commerce, and actually that was one of the first things we joined was we started networking at the San Diego Chamber of Commerce. I would target specific marketing directors at local companies, because at that time it was funny. Now we've noticed over the last 13 years that location matters less and less. People would hire you 13 years ago, 12 years ago, because, oh, hey, you're down the street, I know where to find you. Now it's more about industry experience, portfolio, they'll hire you from wherever. Location's not that big of a deal, because with Zoom, and especially in the COVID era, I think everyone's starting to see that, there's really no negative, even working with somebody across the world besides the time difference. But at the time when we were starting, yeah, so I would put together, I would look at the Business Journal, the San Diego Business Journal. I would look at LinkedIn, and put together email lists of people that I want to schedule calls with to talk about, their website. We typically would try to find companies that were established, but their web presence was poor. And, so a lot of times we go to their website and go, hey, we think there's some, opportunity costs with the website you have. And we don't think, this website is actually serving your business well from a lead gen and lead nurturing standpoint. And we'd like to have a conversation about it. So that's what I would do. I compile a list. Typically, I compile it during the week. Every Tuesday would send out, to 150, let's say, recipients with a targeted, specific email, and then hopefully get a couple calls scheduled for that week, and then just slowly build upon that, over time. And then, and I spend almost every lunch out somewhere networking with other business professionals, just meeting as many people as possible, because also the other thing you're looking for is referral partners, PR agencies that you can refer to and they can refer back. Other types of advertising agencies that aren't exactly what you do, or marketing consultants that don't do website design. But, most of the time our quote gateway drug for, any engagement was a website design. Typically it's a company going through some sort of rebranding, brand refresh, and the focal point would be their website. So at that time it was all outbound. Now, it's funny, we do no outbound whatsoever. Like, we rely solely on our website and, inbound marketing tactics to, for people to find us versus going to hit them. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
I was just gonna say, how big are you guys currently? So
Yeah.
2008, 2009, you're 1.5.
Yeah. Now we're 15, and we actually
Okay.
have really no interest in growing anymore from an employee count standpoint. Like, this is really a lifestyle business for us. So you just talk, business owner to business owner. Like, I don't really, call me not that ambitious or not that aggressive, let's say, but I want to have an agency that, provides a good work-life balance. We can be selective and disciplined with the types of projects we take on. A lot of times when you grow, especially if you're growing in a fast clip, which, we've been very slow growth, organic growth. If you grow at a fast clip, a lot of times, you're taking on projects that, are good from a revenue standpoint, but may not even be profitable, and may not even be a good, personality fit or good expectation fit. So, yeah, so we've been averaging, probably, we've kind of plateaued right at the 13 to 15 over the last couple of years, and just kind of stayed at that. We, again, don't want to, first off, from a, being married, to your business partner, everything's kind of intertwined. So
I'm
like,
not sure I could ever do that, to be perfectly honest with
yeah.
you. So that
So,
alone is impressive.
you never really leave work. Like, I mean, the only time you kind of leave work is when you're actually with friends, with friends that you can't talk about work. Like, I mean, we talk about, we don't have kids, our Bop Design's our baby. We live and breathe and talk about work all the time. And it's fun. It's not like, it's not like something that we dread talking about, or, but, we talk about, our employees, our clients, areas of opportunity, things like that all the
Yeah.
time. So,
Let's
but go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and ask you a little bit about growth. So 15 people, we know, talking to agency owners and being in this world ourselves, we know there's points in that, outside of, you're at a point where you're happy. I'm going to say it. I'll put it out there. You're happy where you're at. You've grown to a point where you're able to kind of live and provide and do what and how you want to do it for not only you, but your employees. Getting to that point, the struggle is real, going from your 1.5 people to kind of getting to that point. and especially, 2008, what do you say, 2008,
Yeah.
2009, that was a funny time period that I think a lot of growth comes out of, people starting businesses. It was an opportune time for you guys. The past year, we've kind of gone through some similarities, I'll say hesitantly. You know, how would you, getting from that like 1 to 5, where would you say, or even 1 to 10, where would you say some of those sticky points are, and how did you approach kind of that growth, that initial
Yeah.
growth over the past couple of years? Talk to us
Yeah.
a little bit
So,
about your experience there.
first off, don't, most people when they're like, hey, we got to start a business, they stop. I feel like a lot of them make the mistake of quitting all other revenue generation that they have, like any other, salary, compensation, funnels that they have, and just go right into the business and know that probably you may not even collect one check for 3-4 months, in the business. So like, don't quit everything else that's going on. So like, even my wife and I, like, I was consulting, doing other stuff, and she had a full-time job during that whole time. And then what you do, typically what we were doing at the time, and this isn't, you hire differently as you grow. So like for us at the beginning, we would find contractors, 1099 contractors that we wouldn't hire W-2 employees immediately. We would hire 1099 contractors that would only work for us, a certain, number of hours per week, and then slowly but surely bring them on in terms of, full-time W-2 employees.
Yeah.
Then you get to the point where the luxury is of, essentially, hey, I can put out a formal job, job description and advertisement and bring on a W-2. But at first, you really want to focus on is variable costs as much as possible. Don't
Mhm.
have, when you have fixed costs, but, really you want to tie in, hey, you're paying more in terms of cost because your revenue's gone up and you have more projects coming in that, your contractors can take on. And then once you hit, typically the general rule has been for us that, essentially you want to be at about, on average for an agency, and it depends on what type of agency you are, but like for a web design agency, anywhere from 150,000 to 200,000 in revenue per employee. And when I remember, I think our first year of Bop Design, and I don't have this in front of me, I think it was 30,000 in revenue to 110,000 in revenue the second year, and then 300,000 the third year. So in that third year is all of a sudden where we could bring in more people.
Funny how
And
that happens.
now we're, anywhere like this year will probably be 2.5 to 3 million. And at around right where we should be in terms of employee count per revenue. But yeah, you want to look at, and it depends on the type of business you're in and the type of agency you are. But general rule is 150,000, 200,000 of revenue per employee is typically a good good rule of thumb. And that's, yeah, I mean, there's risk. It's like even getting an office, like you talk about fixed costs. Like now, of course, with COVID, we're paying money on a lease that is really not, no one's ever here. But at the time, having an office was a credibility piece. We'd actually have CEOs. I actually was at a CEO of a small company that Googled our office address and saw my condo, and they're like, well, wait, how established are you? And this is 10 plus years ago now. But that was something I'm like, man, like at that time, there's a perception if you have an office, that means you're more established and you're a safer bet. So having that where, the first office we had, was, I mean, $4,000 or $5,000 a month in terms of rent in San Diego. And you're like, okay, that's 60,000 a year right there, in terms of costs. So, each one of those added fixed costs, is very stressful, but yeah, you just kind of justify it of where you forecast revenue to be, and having that rule of thumb of 150 to 200,000 in terms of revenue per employee.
So that number, I understand you are generalizing that number for per employee, but this must be different based on the type of employee you have, right? So
Correct.
how do you, in terms of percentage, how do you do the math? Like, $50,000 employee should be bringing in $150,000 revenue versus 1,000, $100,000
Yeah,
revenue.
that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, it's just more of a general average. Obviously, you're going to have, an employee at 100,000, you're going to have an employee at 50,000, you're going to have an employee maybe at 150,000. But I just felt like that was, we've worked and networked with other agency owners, and that was kind of the number that we came up with. Now, if you're running like a Google Ads shop, where there's more flow through revenue, or you're, different types of agent, but for a website design agency, we felt like that was a good, yeah, but we have employees at all levels in terms of salary, that, but in general, like, you bring in, you typically want to have some sort of metric, and that was the best, that was essentially the best number we could come up with for that.
So outside of independent contractors, let's talk about the past year and kind of your growth. In our prep call, we had some interesting conversation around, I'll that you currently have a waiting list for projects,
Yeah.
which is kind of a wonderful, not kind of, is a wonderful place to be in. You have a number of proposals out. Let's talk about kind of how you staff that. I know you guys are very, you've talked a little bit about your philosophy, but how did you make it through COVID? I think there's probably a better way to ask that. And I know Varun's probably asked it better in the past, but I'll just put it out there. I think it's, we had an interesting conversation in prep about that. So I'd love to hear your story and how you guys, approach hiring and what that looked like over the past year.
We were very fortunate right before COVID. We were probably doing the best in our business ever. Like, we've never had the waiting list we had for projects. Like, we had basically like 8 weeks of projects lined up that, essentially every day another client was pausing their engagement with us. And this would be, more ongoing marketing, not, project-based stuff. And we were fortunate that, essentially during that time, we could, kind of reshuffle projects around. The other problem we had is we hired, and it actually turned out to be, it worked out fine, but it was stressful. Okay, so we were hiring 2 project managers 4 weeks before COVID hit. And I actually thought I was voting for just 1. I didn't want to have 2 because maybe it's selfishly, the more employees we have, that means the more, sales I need to make. And, I'm not on the service delivery side as much. So for me, I'm kind of like, hey, that means another 150 or 200,000 or whatever, if you look at the average, whatever.
You're doing body to math.
Yeah. So we're bringing in 2. Okay. I'm like, that's, anywhere from, 300 to 400,000 extra revenue. And, it was kind of a tug of war with my wife and I, because my wife, as the creative principal, handles all of the service delivery side. And, that makes her job easier, having these project managers, because she was really doing most of the project management with another more tactician. So we did make the decision to hire 2 project managers, and literally the day before, basically the week before they were going to start, COVID hit. And I mean, they were both very worried and stressed out. They revealed after the fact, like, what was going to happen on our end in terms of, were they ever even going to start with us? They actually both picked up their laptops. We actually never met them in person till this past Thursday. We actually had, our first time in the office, all of us. So they met with our office manager outside the office complex with their laptop and everything they need in terms of office equipment in their car, and went and started working from home. And I was at one point like, man, being, the business partner and the husband, like, hey, I told you so. We should not have hired these people. This, shouldn't have done it. We somehow pieced together. I think if COVID had happened, I guess for me, there was a point during COVID where I typically have about 20 proposals out at some, during 15 to 20. and then the goal is to get to yes or no with every, specific proposal. And I wasn't getting a yes or no. I was getting I had basically 50 proposals out at one specific time. And I just couldn't get an answer. I couldn't
Ugh,
get an answer one
so
way or the other.
frustrating.
Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah. So I had at one point like 50 proposals out and I wasn't getting a yes, no, whatever. I actually had people that would go send the contract over, we're ready to start. And I had I definitely one instance of this where that particular prospect, I never heard from again. Literally,
Oh,
they said,
that's just
send
the
over. I've
worst.
never heard of that before. So you kind of felt like you were in the twilight zone
Yeah.
for a while there where nothing made sense. You were, doing the same thing you were always doing. And, essentially it wasn't, you were doing the same thing, the tried and true thing that you were doing for a long time. And the next thing you know, it wasn't working anymore.
Yeah.
So it came down to, so the project managers actually worked in our favor in terms of, we weren't profitable we were neutral, barely, maybe taking a loss here and there. And we were fortunate. We got the PPP money that kind of helped. We would have been fine one way or the other, I think, but it helped in terms of the stress level. I take no COVID and no PPP money over having, having to deal with COVID and the PPP money. It was, we would have been much more profitable without COVID. But, essentially we were about 3 business days from possibly having to furlough everyone 1 day a week, basically every Friday or every other Friday. And all of a sudden it was a matter of just a couple days that, essentially I started gaining commitments and we really threaded the needle. It was that close. And, we were very fortunate. We had, turns out we had no, I can say to all of our, or anyone that we talked to, like, I'm proud that, we had no layoffs, no reduction in pay, no furloughs during the whole time of COVID. But that's, it's, I think, I don't really know what to attribute it to. I think
Luck.
yeah,
Well,
You mentioned that two of the project managers that you hired just came to the office for the first time. So that means you still have an office, which brings me to this question. Are you going to keep that office? How's your strategy going forward about the office? And you mentioned earlier that office address is very important to you, your customers. So all of that, how does that play into going forward?
That's a great. I don't foresee us having this office beyond our lease. I mean, we have an office here that can, basically accommodate 15 people. And, I'm only requiring till the end of our lease. We still have 3 years on our lease, FYI. But we're going to just have, first and third Thursday that we're going to all hang out and be together and then everyone can work from home and they can come in whenever they want. But, they're not required to come in. And I actually look at having more of a telecommuting policy that's more encouraging of telecommuting. That helps, I think, attract and retain employees. We still want to have, they can still come in when they want to, but, they're not required to. And we've actually I know that it's going to be a competitive marketplace for employees. And, I think there's going to be employers that are going to wisen up to this, in particular in certain high priced real estate areas of the country that, we've had 2 employees that left San Diego. One's working in Idaho, one's working in San Antonio, Texas. They both telecommute because I know that once COVID was done, both wanted to, it was very expensive to live in San Diego. It was much, less expensive to, essentially live somewhere else. I know that, after COVID was done, there's going to be much more, there's going to be companies all over the world, and in particular in the US, that's going to be a big selling point for them, that, hey, guess what? I can have more flexibility, live where I want, afford a house, let's go, let me go to that company because of that more, positive, more positive, encouraging telecommuting policy.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's what we are hearing more and more from other companies as well. I'm reading about it. I'm listening that nobody is going full-time remote because that, makes them like, that doesn't give them the competitive advantage anymore. So with that said, like if you are going to be remote and you're going to continue have your employees go remote, uh, from California to Texas and to Idaho, have you thought beyond that? Meaning, outside the country, have you ever considered working now? Because everyone, like earlier it was different, but now you have been forced to do that. How has your philosophy changed about going, near shore,
Global.
offshore,
Yeah.
global,
Yeah. And actually, full disclosure, we do work with, on the outsource front, like development teams, primarily in India, that we've worked with for 5, 6, 7 years, that help in terms of our development. Because the funny thing is the talent, the WordPress talent is superior in India over the US WordPress talent pool. And you're typically paying, a quarter of the price. So we do that, but everything else, development's good because there's not, it's programming and there's not, cultural or language barriers, and time issues. So the great thing with, working with an agency, an outsourced web development agency in India is that, our day ends here and there's days just starting. So that's nice so that they can, you almost have a 24-hour operation, 5 days a week. But in terms of any other offshoring, outsourcing, on at least for Bop Design in particular, because I know, you get, I get solicited daily about, SEO, offshoring, outsourcing, or at Google Ads. I think there's just so many barriers in terms of, language, culture. I don't think that would ever make sense. So the only thing that I can look at, and so we have been doing that to answer your question over the last 5 to 6 years. And, it's just basically taking that cost savings and passing that on to, to your client.
So it's funny, and it's good that you mentioned about your experience working with outsourced companies for 5, 7 years, because that brings me to this next question about. I mean, you have clearly seen the advantage, and those advantages are about cost and quality. But I think what our listeners and other smaller agencies think about outsourcing is, it's a burden, it's too much work, it adds more work than it reduces work. You must have done something differently, or something that has been helping you, make sure it works for you. So maybe you can share some tips and ideas on what did you do, how did you make it work, so that people can learn from that.
All essentially cast the net out wide, where you basically make sure that anyone you're vetting in terms of an outsourced agency, they have to jump through many hoops to even have a test project with you. So, make sure they could just follow simple directions in an email, like, hey, can you send me, 3 example websites that you've done? And sometimes I'll even put in there, even though it's not relevant on the development front, but like 3 B2B, companies that you've done work for. See if they can even understand and follow that direction. And then the thing after that, people could talk, you could talk. Unless you actually see them in action, it doesn't matter. So I always pick, like, typically we'd start with like, hey, develop this landing page, something very, very small, and see if they can do that. Then you kind of, and most of the time, it's something small that's not going to cost you a lot of money, and position as a pilot program and then expand from there. Because the problem is with, interviewing or looking at work, you're really not going to know, if something's going to work unless you actually get into a, some sort of formal engagement. The other thing is you need to, at some point, you want to have options. So like, you don't want to be, typically you don't want to be resting on your laurels where you only have 1 or 2 partners that your whole business is relying on. Typically, you want to have like 3, 4 in the web development or whatever type of partner you have. So there's various options. There's been a problem in particular because I think we now have a partner in the Philippines because we have a partner. India right now, at least over the last month or so with COVID, has been really bad. And all of a sudden you have something in particular that happens in one particular country or geographic region. If you have all 3 of your web development agencies there in India, that could be a real problem. So, so essentially kind of balancing that out, but you can't bring them in. And we'd actually sometimes we'd even have sometimes where it wasn't even a real project. It was something that we had already hired another agency to do. But we're like, you know what, for $1,000 or a couple $1,000, let's try them out. We'll pay them and make sure. That's the other big thing is like, I think people, I feel like people cheap out sometimes on certain things where I'm like, just pay them. Like, okay, it could be a discounted rate and you position it that way. But typically I like to pay them whatever their going rate is. So then I know, the problem is even if they say, oh, don't worry about it, you don't need to pay as much, you'll still be the top priority. No, you're not going to be. Like, you need to pay them whatever their going rate is, because then that's how you'll be treated when you pay the going rate going forward. So
being from India myself, I think one of the problem I've seen and working with many people in India is their inability to say no. Right? They want to say yes to everything, and they want to make sure you're happy, which is good, but then not at the cost of them losing money or them prioritizing their work, or just saying for the sake of your happiness, like, yes, you'll be happy, we'll do everything for you, but that doesn't happen because in reality that's not, they have only so much time, right? So I like your approach where you go with what they're asking so that you're happy, make sure that work is done. So that mindset is very important. The other thing is also some people struggle with is the time difference, right? So in your company, how have you managed that? The stories that we hear from many people, like there is always, and being in California, it's like even 3 hours more difference, right? So like almost 12 hours difference. So it's mostly in the morning or evenings, but still being a company of 15 plus employees, and you are at a level where you probably are not dealing with, the developers themselves. So do you rely on your project managers, or you have somebody else who is dedicated to only work with offshore, or what's your strategy and how do you deal with that?
So I mean, it tends to be more, early evening, later evening type calls. Fortunately, I'm not intimately involved in a lot of that. Even the vetting of the particular agencies, our development team knows what they want. The beauty of it is actually, it's funny. That's the other big thing. Like, you need to have, with outsourced or offshore type, any sort of task or skill that you're offshoring, you need to have people that have same type of skills internally, because most of our clients, if they ask, maybe 25% of our clients know that we offshore things to India. It's not like we're secretive about it in any way. I'm talking about it here. It's just not asked about a lot. And most of the time the client never knows, because any development question is actually handled by one of our 2 developers in-house. They are the 2 that, essentially, the negative is, hey, you got to be on a lot of times late night, early evening type calls with India. But the beauty of it is, hey, by the next morning, you have a new kind of, baked out, basically fully fledged out, project done. Of course, with a lot of our development, we're talking 3-4 weeks, but a lot of times it's more in terms of where there's a lot more communication back and forth is with edits, revisions that are a little bit smaller, more acute problems that, they have to work with. But good or bad, I mean, I don't have to deal with it that much, but the one positive of it is you feel, you have this sense, is even a small 15-person agency, you're like, man, like, we're operating, there's somebody's working for our clients all the time. And and you kind of, it's, you almost get impressed by that, where you're like, man, that's really cool. Like even a small business that, there's always something happening.
It's kind of like the secret weapon that everybody knows about.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to have in your back pocket, I guess.
Yep.
So you've talked a little bit about kind of how you got to where you are. We've talked a little bit about kind of growth and some of the,
Yep.
the how you get to the next level within your organization, a little bit of some of the struggle through COVID. Let's talk about, your superpower as an agency. What's the thing that you guys do better than anybody else in the market at the moment? Going back to your myth.
Yeah. So I would look at, I'll just say in particular, small to mid-market, there's no one that I think holistically helps, not, from a brand perspective, a website perspective, and a lead generation perspective, does a good job with all of those connecting together in one agency, with keeping prices, accessible. We work with enterprise companies, but the bulk of our, are small to mid market. So, 50 to 100 people, that we're very good at, holistically putting a package together that, is accessible to those types of companies in the B2B space, that, hey, we want to rebrand ourselves, essentially create a user interface that, takes into account technical SEO components like page speed, things like that. And then at the same time, implement an on-page, off-page SEO strategy, digital marketing strategy to generate ideal client leads. I think, it's funny, I would say there's agencies that do each one of those components better than us, but all together for the price, I think we're a very good value. Like, it's like back in the day, the compact stereo versus like the component system, or, so I'm dating myself here, but like, you can put together a component system and everything's gonna be better, but like the price can be higher. A lot of times they don't communicate well together or work, but they haven't worked on projects together of putting together that holistic package. And at the end of the day, it's all about quality of leads coming in, and, really utilizing, we help transform our client websites into a 24/7 sales tool.
I like it. The soup to nuts kind of holistic approach.
Yeah. And we were small. So the beauty of that is that, sometimes you'll see agencies, a lot of times the larger you are, this isn't always the general, not always the rule, but you have more mouths to feed. There's a little bit more, unnecessary positions, or you're kind of paying for that extra, that extra human resources. And I feel like we're good at staying lean. And we just launched our 400th client website last week.
Congratulations.
So, we're very good at, getting websites start to finish. And the proof's in the pudding too. Like, we're the #1 ranked web design agency. You're #1, #2, it typically fluctuates, but #1 or #2 ranked web design agency in North America, according to Clutch, which, I always call it like the Yelp for professional services firms. So we're, clients are very happy with, the types of, the results that come out of our, service delivery.
So let me ask you one more question as we wrap up here. As we've talked a little bit about past, we've talked about now, let's talk about the future. What do you see in the next, as we come out of COVID, as we emerge into the sunshine, you guys in San Diego and tend to be in the sunshine regularly, what's coming? What's on the horizon? Is it maintain? Is there a little growth? What are you thinking is the future for Bop Design?
I think it's going to be, again, more maintain and looking inward at processes to become more efficient and identify, like, I think we focused over the last, 13 years really on outward of, hey, just, let's, we're not aggressively growing, but hey, let's grow year to year and let's find, more customers, this and that. I think the good thing, and we're lucky to have this, that there's enough customer flow coming in that now we can actually look more inward on how do we get projects done faster, maximize value for the client in terms of what we're doing, and just be more profitable long term. And a lot of that's going to be also looking at the types of projects we take on, like analyzing that too. Like these types of projects tend to generate more value. It's a win-win. They generate more value for the client. They generate more value for Bop Design. So yeah, I think it's going to be much more kind of stay where we're at and just be more hopefully selective, discipline on the types of projects we take on, and then continuously looking at process improvement internally.
Going to go for another Inc. 5000 award?
Yes. So that's yes. So the fortunate thing, because that's like, I think so I think this may be good or bad. This probably be the last year. We just did apply for it again. Hopefully we'll make it one more year, but I think after that, I think there's gonna be a little bit of a plateau, where, you hit over because I think you have to be 2 million to be even eligible. And then, you got to go, up each year. The beauty for us, it may help us even a year from now, because I think the next, COVID, we generated more revenue in 2020 versus 2019, which I'm sure we're in the minority on. So, we could be on there a couple more years, but I do anticipate, we plateau off. Like for me, I've worked with really, grow, aggressive growth companies. And sometimes it's gonna be a fun ride, but I think there's a lot of times it's a miserable ride in some ways for the employees. And, there's just a lot of volatility and, a lot of, ways to improve process. But I mean, they're growing dramatically. So that's just the nature of the beast. Like for me, I feel like we retain our employees because we're never too aggressive in terms of growth. We keep, we're slow and steady and disciplined.
Well, it goes back to those agency metrics. What do you care about? Growth can be represented in a couple different ways, whether it's revenue growth, whether it's client-based growth, whether it's, service growth. In your case, the optimization component, you've been around for long enough that you're like, okay, let's take a peek at how we're doing this and kind of optimize and refine and affect the bottom line from that perspective. Well, this was a great conversation. Thanks so much for chatting with us. Varun, any other last questions for Jeremy? Otherwise, Jeremy, this was great. Where people can find you, I have your LinkedIn profile. You're on the LinkedIn, you're on the Twitter at Bop Design SD, and your company website, bopdesign.com. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thanks again for having me. And I look forward to having a conversation sometime in the future.
Sounds good. And that's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell someone about the podcast. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agencies.build.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcast.